Well, it's go slow to go fast, all right? Because you're ending up just creating your own friction if you're just trying to drag people along. Right? That resistance doesn't get you anywhere. But instead, if you pause and you understand what their concerns are, you hear them out. Maybe they've got some great ideas that moves you into a slightly different direction. The course correction can be really helpful. So much of what I've learned and so much of what I believe I do is doing more listening than talking, because so much can be revealed if you're not speaking all the time.
Welcome to the True Leadership Podcast, where we sit down with executive leaders to explore what leadership really means through the lens of their stories, their wins, their struggles, their vision, and their lessons along the way. I'm Ty Hammond, founder of One Mountain Leadership and creator of the True Leadership Approach, an awareness-based path that helps leaders shift their focus from what to do about their problems to how to grow from them. Whether you're just stepping into leadership or are well-seasoned and at the top of your game, your potential won't be realized following someone else's script, but you can draw insights from their stories and turn it into wisdom by putting it into practice in your own life. Welcome to the True Leadership Podcast, where we explore the essence of leadership beyond tactics and performance by sitting down with executives to hear what matters most to them. I'm your host, Ty Hammond. Today's guest is Angela Cheng-Cimini. Angela is a globally recognized human resources executive, board advisor, keynote speaker, and passionate advocate for the future of work. With more than 30 years of experience partnering with C-suite leaders, she has helped organizations strengthen culture, build leadership capability, and align people strategy with business success. Currently serving as Chief Human Resources Officer at the Chronicle of Philanthropy, Angela is also a trusted advisor to technology startups, a frequent contributor to conversations on AI, employee experience, and organizational transformation, and a leading voice championing AAPI representation and inclusive leadership in today's workplace. It's my pleasure to have Angela with me here today. Welcome to the show, Angela.
Thanks so much for having me, Ty. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So I always start here. Every leader, of course, has a beginning. Who we are as leaders at work and in life starts taking shape, of course, long before we make it to any position of executive leadership. I'm curious, who's someone from your early life or an early experience that really shaped not only the leader, but the person that you are today?
There's two. So one is my dad, probably, the smartest guy I know, which is a tough way to grow up. But also, he broke a lot of sort of the conventions of what it meant to be an Asian dad. I was supposed to be born a boy. I didn't have a name for the first week of life because they didn't have a girl's name. And girls don't tend to figure large in the family tree, but my father was not at all intimidated by that and really treated me like, the best thing that ever happened to him, and always believed that I could do anything I wanted to do. So it really held me to a high standard. And I carried that forward, through my career, to be sure. But then I met a guy by the name of Jim Lawler, who is the first vice president of HR that I served under at Frito-Lay. And he really showed me what advocacy looks like. He always had time, for the little people, if you will, right? I was a lowly associate, just fresh out of school, green as can be, and was having a really difficult time sort of navigating the political landscape of a corporate office. And I ran into more than my share of knots because I just didn't understand how the game was played. And he showed me how to get by without giving up who I was, right? Sometimes you can play that game so hard that you forget what's important to yourself. And that also that it was okay to ask for help because there was always someone who was willing to give a hand.
I'm curious how you see that experience, and sounds like mentorship modeling from Joe, showing up in how you lead today.
Oh my gosh, it's everything. When I first became responsible for a team, most of the folks were veterans, many, many more years of experience, and I learned really quickly that I did not, need not, should not always have the answer. that one of the most powerful things was just to look at them and say, what do you think we should do? So we would crowdsource the best ideas. I would defer anytime I could. In fact, it became a joke. They'd be like, I know, Angela, I should tell you first what I think. Like, well, yes, because you've been doing this longer than I have. And it would be really arrogant of me and, probably just dumb not to take their advice. And so learning that experience and wisdom is hard won and hard fought, and we're silly to overlook the richness of that resource. And I think it was one of the ways that I could establish my credibility was knowing, when to say I'm making this call and when to say, no, this, better.
Yeah. So really, there's so much humility in leadership like this. I consider like just asking for input is one of the most powerful things that we can do. It's so simple. I'm curious to just to stay here and expound on it a little bit, because it's so simple, right? We could just say, oh, just ask for input. And yet so many leaders will hold on to that feeling like I need to have the answer and won't extend. What is it your sense that, what helps with that? What has helped you with that? What is a way in which leaders can...
You screw up the first time because you got over your skis. Right? I mean, that it's a really horrible and yet valuable lesson. Like, oh, yeah, that was just pure bravado. Like I had no business sticking my nose there. And you learn that lesson publicly and painfully, not to do that again. I mean, at least for me, that was not a trap that I wanted to fall into again. And so recovery from that was fast, because you want to quickly redeem yourself, right? And be like, okay, I'm not making that mistake again. And so it has always boggled me when senior leaders are reluctant to ask for help. I just think there's so much pressure to get it right. But also it's so much easier to share accountability and responsibility when frankly it's distributed. So I mean, there's also just sort of a sharp play about that as well. Like we're all in this together. We're gonna reach consensus, and if we fail together. But if we win big together.
Love that. Well, in this podcast, of course, we're exploring the essence of leadership, true leadership, and that's going to mean different things to different people. What does true leadership mean to you? What makes a true leader in your eyes?
For me, I think it's resilience, because you aren't always going to get it right. You're going to have to bring people along. You can't just charge ahead. In fact, one of the most longstanding pieces of feedback I ever got from someone was, Angela, you're so sharp, and your instincts are good, but you fail to look behind you to see if the team is with you. And it's not that we're not with you; we're just catching up to you. Like you're just moving so fast, and you're not meeting us where we are in the journey. You've already thought it through. You're there. You're like 10 steps ahead. And so the resilience aspect of that is knowing when to just slow down and just meeting the moment, meeting people's energy where they are, learning to give them the information, the energy, the time that helps them process and perform at their height, because it's different speeds, it's different amp levels for each people. Some people need it quiet and soft. Some people love it at 11, right? And so I think really being continually conscious that leadership is a fluid thing. And it's not one size fits all. So for me, I think it's about resilience.
I hear resilience in that. I really hear deep listening too. And I'm curious because, I mean, listen, we hear it over and over and over again, slow down. I think that it's, as far as advice goes, slow down is about as good as it comes. And yet, as we know, extremely hard to do, potentially even harder now with the pace of everything. And I hear a lot when, again, maybe it's a little bit our language, I'm hearing resilience, but I really hear you, the willingness to slow down, the willing and the capacity to listen. What helps you with that, especially from a C-level perspective where things are moving really fast?
Well, it's go slow to go fast. right? Because you're ending up just creating your own friction if you're just trying to drag people along. Right? That resistance doesn't get you anywhere. But instead, if you pause and you understand what their concerns are, you hear them out. Maybe they've got some great ideas that moves you into a slightly different direction. The course correction can be really helpful. At the end of it, it's much more efficient and effective to listen. And as a human resources practitioner, so much of what I've learned and so much of what I believe I do is doing more listening than talking, because so much can be revealed if you're not speaking all the time.
It's this really interesting thing that I find in work with leaders, and it really, I feel like, is a capacity and something that's learned, to understand that, oh, we can actually be getting a lot more done by me not doing something sometimes, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And me just
Yes.
like feeling the busyness. I call it I think of it as like unlocking the bike. I can just
Hmm.
taking the time to unlock the bike is like asking questions and slowing down, and it helps me go faster later.
That's right.
Even though I just want to start running right now.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, there's this whole concept of sort of subtractive and additive, right? I mean, sometimes we don't do enough of taking stuff away so that we can clear out the noise. The to-do list looks more impressive when you've got 100 things on it, but what are the really big levers that actually deliver the important, significant results? You find that a lot of stuff is just busyness. It's window dressing to the work that actually matters.
I'm curious if that insight works into this next question, or what you'll have to share here. It's one of my favorite questions, because I think the turning points that we experience as humans and as leaders are so fundamental to our growth. I'm curious if you'll share about a time when you realized, that your way of leading or living, no longer met the demands of work and life, and you really, growth was really needed.
Mm. So if you take a look at my CV, Ty, you'll see that I haven't held a job nor stayed with one organization longer than 3.5 years. I was really hoping that my last gig would be where I retired, but that was not meant to be. And for a long time, that was a liability for me. People were like, "She can't hold down a job," right? But these days, if you're somewhere 2 years, you can get a lot done and feel good about that and move on. It's not so much of a ding. But for a long time, that really haunted me. And that was because I learned early on that for me, that roles and positions had a shelf life for me, that at some point they did sort of run out in terms of my ability to continue to contribute or my ability to continue to get something in return from that experience. And so, I the turning point for me is, when does this no longer when does this equation become out of balance? I am giving more than I'm getting back, or there's something has changed in terms of the leadership philosophy of what we believe to be right and what we believe to be true. We fall out of alignment. I think one of the things that a really good CHRO does is test the calibration of the leadership team and that of which we're asking of the organization. These are our stated values. Is what we're asking our organization to do in alignment with that? Or are they working against each other? And so I'm constantly testing that. Does this make sense? Is this who we are? Is this true to our DNA? And I'll fight that good fight until such time when I realize that I no longer have a chance to win, because then I am no longer serving the purpose of the organization. Clearly they want someone else to serve as a steward for the organizational values, and I will step down and make room for someone else. So I have the first time I had to leave on those terms was extraordinarily difficult, because I thought that was a failure of mine. And now I've learned it's just sort of the natural ebb and flow of what my career arc has looked
I'm really happy to hear you bring this particular point up, because I think it's something that leaders often struggle with. Like, it's a personal failure
like.
sometimes, and it's, of course, it comes back to the question of influence, and to what extent can I have influence and shift the
Mhm.
direction based on what is in my wheelhouse and what I see as good for the organization. And it's a simultaneous, like, yeah, sometimes we can improve there, and other times it is just about realizing, like, oh, this organization doesn't want to move in that direction. I really hear a lot of, a willingness to be honest with yourself in that. I guess what I'm really curious to hear is, in those situations where when you realize it's no longer a fit, what are you needing to let go of in order to move on? Because that seems like I'm guessing that folks listening to this may come up against that in their own career.
Well, to be sure, I mean, as you stated, I've been doing this for more than 30 years. I have fewer years behind than I do. I have fewer years ahead than I do behind, right? And so I don't have time to waste. I'm not mucking around with people who don't want me at the table. So in that regard, it's really easy for me to do the calculus and say, okay, time for me to move on. But what I think, people often need reminding of is that we always have choices. We always have agency. And so maybe it's not financially viable for you to quit your job today, but what you can do is start networking, brushing up your resume, taking those extra classes, getting your name out there, reconnecting with old bosses so that you can find your next opportunity, so that you're not you're not drowning where you are, so you're actively working for your next thing, even as you're trying to get out of where you are currently. So that is a choice. That's always a choice. You don't have to accept a bad circumstance, because the cost of that is your self-esteem, your ability to practice self-respect. It affects your physical self-care. All those things I value so much more now than I did when I was 25. And so it's easy for me to preach that, right? But I think even if intellectually you go through that exercise of thinking about what it is you're giving up and what it's costing you, I think you come to the same place, and maybe just a little bit faster, which is you need to get out.
Yeah, I think that is certainly my experience in life, is that I get that. I learn that lesson a little bit more quickly along the way. It doesn't take the intensity,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
get me there. Um, Leadership, of course, is so much about what we're shaping for tomorrow. And you just said, you've got a little bit maybe more behind you than in front of you. So I'm curious, what's your vision for your leadership, your legacy, and the impact that you do want to have in the years ahead?
Well, I'd like to stay in the game for as long as I have something to contribute. So I'm in my rewirement phase, Ty. I'm no longer working full time, but I'm working part time so that I can go pursue the things that I didn't have time when I was working, a 65-hour-a-week job. And we moved to DC so that we moved to Maryland so we could be close to our children who are in DC. And that has been hugely gratifying for me. My husband has been basically retired since COVID. So I'm catching up to where he is in terms of checking off the boxes of the things that we each want to do. Um, so, I think so long as I continue to have really engaging conversations with other people about leadership, if I can mentor and role model for the next generation coming up. In fact, this morning I taught a class for aspiring CHROs. That's such fulfilling work. I love that work. Um, you know, and then there's just life to be lived. I have my health. I'm happily married. My children are adulting really well. So I'm incredibly blessed. And so I'm also just taking advantage of all of that because I understand that that's a privilege that I need to nurture and take care of.
The thought that just came up for me, was how lucky children might be to have a CHRO as a in the house as a parent. I think about that all because I'm talking to lots of human resource professionals. Typically tend to be people focused, and happy to hear that your children are thriving. That is the
Well,
legacy there.
it's really funny that you say that, Ty, because I can say this now because my daughter and I are through it, but she was my biggest employee relations conundrum. And I'm like, why can I not figure you out? Like I am literally a professional at listening to people, offering up solutions, collaborating, meeting them where they are. And she was just thwarting me at every turn. A year of deep, intensive therapy helped me figure out how to read her and sense what she needs at any given moment. But that was kind of the joke, was like, I can't get you. I don't understand. I'm a failing CHRO in this particular relationship.
Well, I know of no other long-term immersive leadership development course than Parenthood.
100%. And there's no manual, there's no course, there's no certificate. And if there is, it's all a sham. Nobody knows it.
Yeah, in the minute that you got it, you lost it.
That's
Right.
right. Exactly. Something has changed. They rewrite the rules all the time. Yeah.
Which is really relevant, right? Because that is true, especially. I mean, to some extent, I think it's always been true with the rate of change, but especially now, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Things are constantly changing. Which, maybe that's a good lead into my next question. I'm really curious with what you're seeing. This is a particular poignant, important time in history with the advent of AI and the pace of change and all of these things. What's your take on what is separating the leaders who are really excelling right now from those who are really struggling?
Human first. Those who understand that people are going to be probably the solution to every business challenge you have. So in this course that I taught this morning, it was about how CHROs help organizations through times of crisis. And one of the case studies that I shared was about an organization that strayed from its organizational values. They lost the ethos that made them successful. And so organizations that continue to think about just the bottom line, just think about the return on investment or just the stock price, are missing the whole bit of the equation, that what makes organizations run and what makes them uniquely positioned to win in the marketplace is the talent that they have. And if you can unlock and inspire their energy, that's 10x returns. The New York Times just released an op-ed co-written by Adam Grant that that has research that shows that organizations that force the RTO mandate is highly correlated with how narcissistic the CEO is, because it's a management flex, right? It has nothing to do with about what sort of environments and cultures can we create so that our people can best perform. If they understood that there would be no need to force people back into the office. Now, we know hybrid is actually best. Some mixture of in-person and working from home is actually the best formula. But CEOs that insist that, forcing people to bend to their will are not people first. And so I think those organizations may hit, an immediate spike in their productivity or performance, but as soon as a better opportunity comes along, they will lose their best talent.
I'm so curious. I couldn't personally agree more. I guess my curiosity is what you're seeing right out there, like with all of the changes that are happening from your purview as a CHRO, and generally keeping tabs on what's happening out there and training the next generation of leaders. How's that impacting that people first orientation in organizations?
Well, it's so interesting because, as you say, this is just a moment in time. 10, 15 years from now, the next generation of CEOs will only ever know remote work. So this whole argument about whether or not people should be in the office or not, like, that is going to be put to bed in not that long a time, right? And so we're struggling over this when the next senior leaders will know nothing about how we easily took a 2-hour commute Monday through Friday because that's what we did. And so what I see is that they are emphasizing work-life balance. They are choosing organizations with whom they believe in their mission, their values, their reason for being. They don't necessarily just want to work for an organization that makes another thing that ends up in a landfill. They want to work for an organization where they care about. They're willing to sacrifice a little bit more pay to not have to work 7 days a week. So I think that is clearly going to drive how leaders lead, because that's what we do, right? We happen to project what we value onto what we think is good for the organization. That's why we're in these roles. And so it'll be really interesting to see what the next generation does, given what they have survived with COVID and AI and whatever else gets thrown into the mix. They will have seen so much disruption that I think leadership is going to take on a whole new form that maybe we haven't even yet considered.
The way that you just said, I'd never thought about it this way, but taking it a look at something from the perspective of, uh, the hill that I'm standing on or the thing that I'm fighting for may be an argument that will be completely obsolete in a certain amount of time. That's a really interesting lens to look at things from. It might have you go, how much time do I want to spend here?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Where are you feeling the most tested and stretched right now?
So, I mean, I hate to say it, but I do think it is AI. There's just so much change management involved with it. I mean, the spectrum of acceptance of AI is wider than anything I've ever seen. Right? You've got the early adopters who are happy to outsource anything and everything, and agents and all of that. They love it. They're living in Star Trek land. And then the other end, which is it's biased, it's bad for the planet, it lies, it does sloppy work, it's terrible. I'm not going to use it unless you force me to. And so how do you bridge the gap? Because, the truth is generally somewhere in the middle. I don't know that you want to just free for all give it everything, but also there is definitely some good to be had out of AI. One of the risks for me is that there is a widening equity gap among those who embrace it and those who don't. And so a technology that has the potential to democratize access to information might actually be exacerbating the information gap for people who have access to AI. I remember volunteering for an organization where we were working with marginalized and underrepresented communities of students. And some of these kids had to go to the local McDonald's to take the call because they didn't have Wi-Fi at home. That is suboptimal, right? And so now you're talking about AI, which is sucking up even more bandwidth. What are they going to do? How are they going to do the most basic forms of homework? And so we really have to think about how do we bring them along? How do we give them the resources so that they can catch on to that without alienating the people who are innovating and experimenting and showing us the way? So, and I have my own personal feelings about that. I mean, I love a good Boolean string search, right? Like I don't need, Google is good enough for me sometimes. Everything doesn't need to be jumped into an LLM. And I did a quick search and I'm living near 10 data centers. That freaks me out tremendously.
So that's you personally. I'm curious about your take as a CHRO with the acknowledgement exactly of this, major gap that people are going to fall all across the spectrum. What's your, and maybe it's unfair to say like your advice, but like your take, your perspective on, a healthy way to, as a leader, as a CHRO, be looking at the amount of change and the
So
kind
that
of
means,
things that are happening.
so
now.
leadership, really good leadership has to cascade because there's no way for CEO to spend time with each individual contributor and understand all their concerns and help them work through that so that they can get to a place where they're adopting the AI. So you have to make sure that your managers are equipped and your leaders are equipped to have those conversations and to bring them along, which requires them to have some sort of savviness around the technology themselves. And that's a huge assumption because there are lots of managers who barely know where to start themselves. So it is a huge intervention that really requires some thoughtfulness. Now, the organization I'm with is under 40 people, so much more easily had, right? We can get down to, each employee and each staff member and walk me through, why you think this is good or why you don't think it's good. But if you're 150,000 people, how do you scale that level of change management? And all that means is that your leaders have to be equipped, which has been true for any change management exercise. But this change is happening so quickly that every day we don't address it means the gap is widening, whether it's the knowledge gap, it's the equity gap, it's the access gap. And so we really have to stay on top of it, which means you have to throw more manpower at it because it requires people first to get people to feel comfortable around using a technology that for some people is really an existential threat.
Yeah, my sense with all of that you're saying there is that I just keep on hearing that the people piece really coming back with this massive amount of focus and the influx and the energy and the attention that is flooding in with resources and technology and all this stuff, to what I'm really hearing is to not forget that it's human beings at the end of the day in the
That's right.
organization.
Yeah, it's not good enough to say humans in the loop, right? We often hear that. It's really humans in the lead. So that's not mine, by the way, but I picked that up. I love that phrase.
That is that is worthwhile, quippy and powerful. This last question is a little bit more of an invitation. You have the time and the space here to offer to our listeners whatever it is that's most in your mind and heart to share right now. So, the floor is yours.
Oh, well, thank you, Ty. I think for me right now, it's a moment for kindness. I talked about leaders who are people first led, compassion, meeting people where they are, showing up with the kind of energy that they respond to the most. I take great care to always start my emails and my chats with a hello. I don't just jump right into business. I try and do a little bit of connectivity before we get down to brass tacks, because I think it matters. And if you're working remote, you're missing the intonation, you're missing the body language, you're missing the context of the entire message, which means that when we do have moments when we come together, you really have to make the most of them. And you don't know what's going on for that person in that day. We are still suffering from an epidemic of loneliness. And so I think that every time we can just reach out and say, hey, how are you? I'm thinking of you. Or how's that thing going that was really stressing you out? That matters. And not because it's good for organizational performance, but because it's good for us as humans, to just reach out and check in and see how people are doing. And, I think my line of work, it's particularly important. And there are still enough scary horror stories where HR is still the sitcom joke. Well, I'm going to report you to human resources because we don't show up enough, as people oriented. And so I would love to see the day when we're no longer the butt of the joke, but we're universally recognized as the function that fulfilled the reason we were formed in the first place, right? Leadership couldn't be trusted. Management could not be trusted to take care of their people, which is why the first personnel function or labor division was begun. And I think sometimes we forgot why we started. And if we could all go back to that, regardless of where you sit in an organization or what you do, I think we would all be better for it.
Well, Angela, I so appreciate the wisdom that you've shared here with me today. I've really gotten so much out of it, and I'm sure that whoever listens is going to equally benefit from what you've shared. Thank you so much for being our guest on the True Leadership Podcast.
Thank you, Ty.
That's it for this episode of the True Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can subscribe to YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this to catch future episodes. This conversation was brought to you by One Mountain Leadership, where we help leaders grow the capacity, confidence, and presence of true leadership through the True Leadership approach. To learn more about the approach, our offerings, our community, and how we can help you realize your potential in both leadership and in life, visit us at onemountainleadership.com.